Thalen gazed out over the city of Arad. Its limestone buildings shone in the midday sun. He stood upon the high tier, looking out over the two lower tiers which followed the great slope, and ended in the vast valley below. The valley was below sea level, and had it not been for the kilometer-wide land that the high tier was built on, it would have been a large bay. Beyond the city walls were a land of farms and forests, of meadows and fields. It was the most fertile land in northern Eathal, rich in grain and harvest. Seldom did crops fail. "Thalen! Thalen!" someone called out. He was snapped out of his thoughts, and turned his attention to the ashen-skinned elf in front of him. "I am sorry, Magi Tevilithan. I got lost in my own thoughts." The dark elf looked at Thalen with his purple eyes, then gazed at Taylor, who stood next to Thalen. "Did you get lost in your own thoughts too, Taylor?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, Magi Tevilithan." "Then what did I say?" She remained silent. Her gaze fell to the ground. "Then I shall repeat myself. This duel is a training duel. Foul play is allowed, but it is not to become dangerous. If I tell you to stop, then you shall stop. Is this understood?" Yes, Magi Tevilithan. Both Thalen and Taylor answered. They already knew all of this, of course. They had dueled many times before. But it was protocol. "I also do not want to see a single fireball or any other kind of offensive spell be flung over the edge and down onto the city, whether by accident or by purpose. Is that also understood?" Yes, Magi Tevilithan. Both Thalen and Taylor answered again. The dark elf looked at them. Nodding, he said, "Good. Then I think we can start. Take your positions." Both moved away from the stone railing and walked down onto the center of the sparring grounds. He stood on the southern side, facing the guild hall, while she stood on the northern side, facing the southern stone wall that shielded the garden of the Healers Guild from rogue spells. Her fiery hair moved slightly in the breeze. So did Thalen's black hair. Their eyes locked. She gave him a smile, and he returned it. He drew upon his magic and voiced a spell of protection, as did she. "Begin!" Tevilithan called out. Thalen dodged a ball of fire that came rushing through the air. It almost singed his pointed ear. The flames crashed into the stone wall behind him. He answered her with a firebolt of his own. The magic flowed through him and released at his fingertips. Fire shot out and flew through the air. Taylor raised her hands. His firebolt dispersed in front of her, the flames trailing along the invisible barrier she had created. She looked up, ready to answer his attack, when she was flung off her feet. Thalen drew in a deep breath. Then he lifted his hands. Taylor was lifted into the air. But before Thalen could do anything else, he was flung backwards. No longer being held up by his magic, she fell, skillfully landing on her feet. As swiftly as he could, he jumped up on his feet again, and just in time to stop a new fireball that came rushing at him with tremendous speed. With a jerk of his hand, it was flung into the stone wall to his left, leaving a scorch mark. But before he could counter, he froze, unable to move a single muscle. He stared into her eyes, and she stared right back. Thalen put all the magic he had left, and all of his willpower, to the task of freeing himself. 1 minute passed, her brow furrowed. He managed to move a little, but his magic reserve was running dry quickly, and his efforts were not enough. He looked down in defeat. She released him. "Good work, Taylor," Tvillithen said in approval. "I want a rematch," Thalen called out. "Oh, come on. Can't you accept that I beat you?" Taylor asked. He looked at her. "If I do, I will never hear the end of it." True enough," she said. Tvillithen shook his head. "Time is running short, but fine. Drink the potions and make yourselves ready." They drank the potions, which restored their reserves of magic. Again they were facing each other. Again they had to place spells to protect themselves. And again they waited for Tvillithen to say the word. "Begin!" This time Thalen began. He didn't want a repeat of the last duel. With a single thought, he pushed her off her feet. When she had gotten back up, he was nowhere to be found. "Invisibility. Cheeky," she whispered, annoyed. She closed her eyes, trying to sense him. She felt nothing. Wait, a faint something. She lashed out. A firebolt rushed through the air and hit the wall to the west. "Where are you?" Again she thought she sensed him, and again she flung a firebolt. Again it hit nothing. A great force slammed into her back. Much of it was shielded by the protection spell, but she was still flung off her feet. She lifted herself with her hands, but was faced with a firebolt. It had yet to leave Thalen's hand. His brilliant green eyes expressed triumph. "Concede?" he asked smugly. Without a word, she kicked his leg, throwing him off balance, and as he fell onto the ground, she jumped onto her feet and made a firebolt in her hand. She smiled at him. "Concede?" "Stop!" They looked at Tvillithen. "It was not getting dangerous!" Taylor exclaimed. "There you are right, Taylor. but time is running short. You two have a very important day. Tomorrow, you will no longer be students. Now you wouldn't want your growling stomachs to drown out Archmage Elrin, now would you? Go, eat some lunch before the ceremony. Now off with you. Thalen rose to his feet, and both of them bowed to Tevillathan before walking off towards the guild hall, leaving Tevillathan alone in the training grounds. Well, not truly alone, because a man in his early 50s, who had stood somewhat concealed behind a tree on the walkway above the training grounds, walked over to the dark elf. The man had short, blonde hair. A life of leadership had caused it to grey early. His eyes were grey and kind. He wore an elaborate robe. Tevillathan turned to face him. Archmage Elrin, he said, and gave the man a nod of respect. Magi Tevillathan, Elrin replied. He turned to look at Thalen and Taylor entering the guild hall in the distance. He has become powerful. You have trained him well, Elrin said. Thank you, Archmage. There are still things he needs to learn. Taylor beats him almost every time. But he is one of the best students I have ever trained. Clever and daring. Perhaps too daring. Invisibility is taxing on the reserve. Well, sometimes you have to be daring to beat your opponent. It also proves Taylor's ability. He was silent for a while. His mother would have been proud. Tevillathan looked at Elrin. Not just of him, Elrin, but of you also. You have raised him well. Elrin nodded, then turned his head away from the guild hall to face Tevillathan. You should follow your own advice, my old friend. Go, get some lunch. The ceremony will be long. Indeed it will. But before I go, I must ask, what about tomorrow? I gather the meeting will be of importance. How did you know? I have not told anyone about the meeting yet. Has your unseen companion given you some insight? Yes. I did also notice that Magi Halmar seemed troubled. His report must be dire. It is. Elrin took a deep breath. I am worried, Tevillathan. There is something going on. Some kind of conspiracy. Documents stolen. Scholars kidnapped. Some even murdered. He paused for a moment. Magic involved. The guards were right then. Tevillathan said. You will learn more at a meeting. It's just that it doesn't add up. There is some information, some clue missing. Elrin said. There was silence for a few seconds. I should get some lunch. And so should you. As you said, the ceremony will take some time. Tevilithan said and bowed slightly. Archmage. He walked off towards the guild hall, leaving the Archmage behind. What is taking her so long? Taylor asked out loud. Thalen glanced at her and said, Be patient. She probably has the tension. You know how Pashara is. Indeed, she said. They were waiting in one of the corridors of the guild hall. The Mages Guild of Elrin was the only proper magic institution in the kingdom. It was a proud institution that had greatly impacted the lives of the people, even if most were unable to join it. Thalen glanced through the window. It looked north. Why does the guild insist on having so many paintings of her? Taylor said, pulling Thalen out of his thoughts. The painting she was looking at was of an elf. She had long black hair, her eyes were brilliant green, just like Thalen's eyes. Do you have something against my mother, the founder of the guild? Thalen asked her. Taylor looked at him funny. I have nothing against her. It's just... Why do they need to have a painting of her in every corridor? 2 in every corridor, actually. I am appalled that you do not know such trivia, he said. She laughed slightly and moved closer to him. They embraced. At that moment, the door to the classroom opened, and out stepped a young woman. Her black hair went below her shoulders. Just like Thalen and Taylor, she wore green robes, indicating that she was a student. The robes were held together by a brooch that looked like the guild symbol. She had dark skin, for she hailed not from Elrin. Her father was an ambassador from an island land far to the south. While she was not technically a Rian, she had both been born and raised in Elrin. A pair of brown eyes eyed the pair, a single eyebrow raised. Was I interrupting anything? It is fine, Pashara. Just hugging him, slightly. Taylor answered her. Thalen smiled sheepishly. Pashara shook her head. So are you two lovebirds done? We need to eat something before the ceremony. Not getting the tension would have helped with that, Pash. Thalen told her. Is it my fault that the teacher gave me 20 minutes of detention for being 5 minutes late? On the last lesson, no less. After you, Pash. Thalen said, shaking his head. Student Taylor, Emran called out. Thalen stood in a line of his peers and classmates. Taylor had stood right next to him, but now she walked towards the marble stairs and the Archmage. They stood in the courtyard of the guild. Surrounding them was the limestone building that was the guild hall. Taylor walked up the 5 steps. The stairs led in under the eastern section of the guild hall. Pillars of marble held up the building. The blue sky was seen beyond them. Family and acquaintances were gathered in the courtyard, all wearing fine clothing, for most were nobles. The few that weren't had been saving for the occasion. At the center of the courtyard stood a fountain. Taylor had now reached the Archmage. "Long have you studied, and long have you waited. Your patience and your work shall not be for naught. Take off the green robes." Taylor unfastened the brooch that held her student robes. Beneath she wore fine clothing, trousers and a shirt made from silk. She gave the robe to an assistant. Elrin turned around, and from another assistant took a blue robe and a brooch. The robes he gave to Taylor. She put them on. "As Archmage, I raise you from student to mage. Welcome to the guild, Mage Taylor Ilithei Arinda," Elrin said, and fastened the blue robes with the brooch of the guild symbol. Applause rang out from the crowd. Taylor bowed, then turned and walked down the stairs. She stopped halfway down and took her place next to her peers who had come before her in the line. Elrin now looked at Thalen. "Student Thalen." Thalen walked from his position and ascended up the stairs between those that had already gotten their new robes, and stood still in front of Elrin. "Long have you studied, and long have you waited. Your patience and your work shall not be for naught. Take off the green robes." Thalen unfastened the robes and took them off. He was also wearing fine clothing beneath the robes, a white shirt of silk and a pair of fine trousers. Thalen handed the green robes over to the assistant on his right. Elrin turned and again took a blue robe and a brooch from the assistant behind him. He handed the robes over to Thalen, who put it on. Then Elrin fastened the robe below the throat with a brooch. "As Archmage, I raise you from student to mage. Welcome to the guild, Mage Thalen, Ilmir, Irion, Vithari, Evair." Again the gathered applauded. Thalen bowed, then walked down and positioned himself next to Taylor. He gazed out over the throng. The closest kin he had in the crowd was his uncle and his two cousins. Elrin called up another student, then another. Then finally it was Pashara's turn. Again applause rang out when the blue robes had been fastened. 10 minutes passed before all students had gotten their new robes and been elevated to mage. Then Elrin raised his voice. "Let us cheer for the new mages of the guild." A great cheer rang out amongst the gathered, and with that the ceremony was over. His fellows walked down the stairs and into the crowd. Thalen, however, turned and walked up the stairs to Elrin. There was a smile on the Archmage's face. "If only your mother could have seen this day," Elrin said, and hugged his son. Thalen smiled slightly. "Who knows?" He paused. "Maybe she is seeing it. I don't like to think that she is dead," Elrin said. Not while there's still a chance that she is out there. Elrin looked out over the crowd. There was much cheer amongst them. Especially not on a day such as this. He said, "You are right, father. Let us not think of such." Thalen also gazed out over the crowd. His eyes locked with Tayla's. She smiled and indicated that he should come with her. "Go, Thalen." Elrin, who had noticed the less than inconspicuous nodding of Tayla's head, said, "Just be home before dinner. We will want to celebrate this day too. Me, your uncle, and your cousins. Such a tremendous day calls for celebration. And don't tear your new robes." "Don't worry, I'll be careful," Thalen said as he left his father's side. Thalen made his way through the throng of people to Tayla. Pashala had already reached her when he arrived. The trio then made their way out of the courtyard, exiting through the western entrance. They came onto the street outside, and there they stopped for a moment. "So what are we supposed to do?" Pashala asked. "We could head down to the Great Square. The summer festival started today," Thalen said. "Or we could head for a tavern," Tayla proposed. "I vote for tavern," Pashala said. "The usual place then?" he asked. "I will see you two down there," Tayla said. Then she was gone, and in her place a falcon stood. She gave out a high-pitched call, then took flight. "Hey, that's cheating!" Pashala exclaimed. "Too late, Pash," Thalen said, laughing. "Let's get down there as fast as we can."